You're listening to Patient 11, a new 4-part podcast investigation from Sky News and The Independent. This is episode 2.
Anyway, I told the staff about it, and they said, it's really appropriate. You shouldn't be like men in your room, coming in your room. But he was quite sort of forceful.
And having been detained on an all-male psychiatric ward in Kent's Littlebrook Hospital over the Christmas of 2013, Alexis, within a matter of hours, found herself alone with the same male patient who entered her room the previous day. We need to warn you, the testimony you are about to hear contains details of sexual violence.
And then the next day, it was Christmas Day. And he sort of was like following me about, this guy. And he said, come on, let's go for some food. And I said to him, the food's the other way, mate. And he said, no, it's this way. I was in such a bad way, it was Christmas Day and I wasn't with my little girl. So I was just thinking about all of that anyway. I wasn't really thinking about him. So I just sort of trusted him and I followed him and we went down this long corridor. I realised when we got to the end of the corridor that we were at the exit of the building and that particular corridor connects all 3 wards together, the women's ward, the mixed ward and the men's ward. Anyway, he pressed me up against the door so that I was completely pressed against the door, and he lifted my top up and he started to sort of touch me in my breasts and then sort of pulled my trousers down, and all I could hear was his breathing, and everything was slow and really loud, and not being able to move and being stuck. And I don't know what exactly happened in my mind, but at some point I was just pushed him away. And I ran to the women's ward.
Upon reaching the women's ward, however, and having explained what happened, Alexis says staff tried to send her back to the same all-male ward where the man at the centre of the incident remained a patient.
And just being in disbelief. Have you literally not just heard what I've just told you?
After experiencing a meltdown, Alexis was placed in solitary confinement.
And they put me in there, restrained me on the floor. And I was left in there on Christmas Day. The door's locked. There's no one in there, it's just me.
Within weeks, and with her hands and feet in safety restraints, Alexis was moved from Littlebrook to a secure unit for what they term acutely disturbed patients.
A short while later, I was asleep in bed and the light was thrown on and 6 people that were wearing black grabbed me out of bed, dragged me, didn't take me, dragged me down the corridor, put me in a cage. And all of a sudden I was in a cage like a dog going to I didn't know where. And I remember asking the member of staff that was in the back, through the cage, through the bars, where we were going, and she said, you're going to a psychiatric intensive care unit. And I arrived at this, what I now call PICU, Psychiatric Intensive Care Unit, PICU, and the cage was opened and handcuffed, I was taken into the PICU. PICU is a whole new level of security. You don't get leave, you're not allowed out in the garden. There's basically your bedroom and then there's a communal space, and there are very, very mentally ill people there. There's no sort of safe feeling about it.
Although she'd been placed in a psychiatric intensive care unit, Alexis was still without a clear diagnosis, despite having spent more than a year as a mental health inpatient, and during which period she'd been given a number, patient 11. She had, by this stage, however, told her mother, Linda, a retired police officer, that she was attacked at Littlebrook Hospital.
And she told me that she had been assaulted outside in the corridor, and a nurse who was passing by from another ward sort of approached her and tried to console her. So I phoned up the manager and I put this story to him, and I said, either you report it to the police or I'm going to.
At the same time, Alexis's mother, Linda,
Reference our daughter, Alexis,
wrote a formal letter of complaint to Kent and Medway NHS Trust.
during the early hours of Tuesday the 24th.
When the Trust replied in early 2014,
We have concluded our investigation and are now in
the
a
letter,
position to
signed by
assess
Angela
your
McNabb,
concerns.
then Chief Executive of Kent and Medway NHS Trust, in part, read,
Please accept our apologies for Alexis's poor experiences on Woodlands Ward. As a vulnerable female patient, we accept that she should not have been admitted as the sole female on a ward with other male patients. Unfortunately, at the time of her admission, that was the only bed available. However, we acknowledge...
But they were not in a position to take any further action because the psychiatrist on the ward said that he didn't have capacity to go through the police investigation. So unfortunately, that was the end of it.
Please be assured that this is something that is now being communicated across the service line by the Service Manager for Admissions and Discharges so as to avoid a similar situation occurring in the future.
Within months, however, Alexis would make her second sexual assault complaint, having been returned to a mixed-sex psychiatric care setting at St Martin's Hospital near Canterbury, overseen by the same Kent Medway NHS Trust at the centre of the first incident.
I was getting some treatment in the treatment room with a female nurse. I'd just come in from a run, so I was wearing running shorts and a running vest top. It was the summer, so it was quite warm. And a male patient came into the treatment room and started groping me on my breasts and on my bum.
Following this second incident, Alexis's family lodged a series of complaints with Kent and Medway NHS Trust, including one of sexual assault.
I am writing to inform you that Maria Stafford, the acute service manager, has concluded her investigation.
This time, the Trust replied with the following.
It is unfortunate that incidents like these occur due to the acute nature of the patients admitted to Foxglove Ward. And it is apparent that they were very distressing for Alexis.
And that was the attitude of the Trust. Almost what do you expect was the attitude. You know, they wrote that it's due to the nature of the patients that are on the wards, as if it's a given.
Now, for a second time, a sexual assault complaint was made and no further action was taken. We now know that complaints like these are far from isolated. When Alexis told us she knew of other female patients who had had a similar experience in psychiatric care, we decided to follow it up. There are more than 50 NHS England mental health trusts. We submitted Freedom of Information requests to all of them, asking for the number of recorded complaints of sexual abuse on inpatient wards since 2019, so much more recently than Alexis's experience. And in the last 4 years alone, we've identified 20,000 sexual safety incidents, from inappropriate comments to sexual assault, involving both patients and staff. These figures were obtained from more than 30 authorities.
There was no safeguarding at all in the way things happened, and the fact that he slowly got me. They got more than 3 hours on the CCTV. He was in my room, and that would never happen in another ward. I know I'm not the only one who's been through it. It's just horrific that how endemic it is. Like, it's just everywhere.
In addition to Alexis, we've met yet more female patients, women behind these numbers, who were raped or sexually assaulted in NHS England or NHS England supported care. And over the same time period, we've discovered more than 800 allegations of rape or sexual assault involving female patients across a snapshot of more than 20 NHS England mental health trusts. The majority of these complaints were made in mixed male and female wards or shared spaces. The very environments Alexis was being treated in.
The worst thing that could happen was not making it out of there, was not seeing my daughter again, was not seeing my family again.
This fear of not seeing her family again would only intensify because undiagnosed and legally detained under section, Alexis descended even deeper into the psychiatric care system.
All you've got in a psychiatric hospital is time, like prison. But in a psychiatric hospital, you don't know when your prison sentence will be up. Your section can just be extended and extended. There's no end date. So all you've got is time to think between your sort of drug-filled haze. And that's, I think, what led to the helplessness, because I couldn't get out of this distress cycle. I couldn't get out of overload, meltdown, restraint, overload, meltdown, restraint. And, you know, at some points I just wanted to die. And these professionals that have been paying, by this stage, hundreds of thousands of pounds to look after me, had no idea what was wrong with me, apart from being a difficult patient, you know, being a difficult person that just was treatment resistant. I was called treatment resistant.
Jenny, pleased to meet you. How are things?
And it's at this point in Alexis's story that we need to jump forward 2 years.
What kind of coffee would you like?
Because it wasn't until 2016 that Alexis would find a way out of psychiatric care, albeit in the form of two people so moved by her story, they would eventually help her flee the country.
I'm a conventional GP. Like Linda, the police officer, I took the conventional view of things, and I had no such idea of escaping anyone. It just wasn't part of the DNA of retiring GP.
A doctor of nearly 30 years, David Forsyth, and his retired partner, Jenny Middleton, arrived at the Quinn family home in 2016, not as accessories to some future escape, but simply to visit their friends, Alexis's parents, Linda and John.
And it simply spilled forth from them, and we spent a whole afternoon here with them confiding in us about their terrible experiences.
By coincidence, that same weekend, Alexis was granted a temporary release from a nearby psychiatric care facility in Ramsgate to see her daughter, Abby. Just months old when Alexis first entered care, Abby was now aged 4.
The difference between the benign health service that I was used to and this mess that this girl was in made me want to help.
During this first meeting, Alexis shared not only details of her sexual assault complaints, but countless complaints of restraint and forced isolation over the previous 2 years, brought about in the main by episodes of distress or legitimate concerns she may self-harm. Still detained under section, it would take doctors until the spring of 2014 to finally get to the bottom of her condition after Alexis was moved to a specialist unit in York.
I had a meltdown one evening and a doctor came and she watched the meltdown. She left me be, there was no restraint. And she said in the morning, "Alexis, you're not sick." She said, "You're autistic. And that's why your treatment's not been working, because you don't have a personality disorder." In that moment, I didn't know what to say. And at that point, I felt a lot of comfort and I felt calm. You know, probably the calmest I've felt, we're talking now, in 2 years. You know, I could converse, I could talk, I could see a bit of myself again. And I wanted to start life again and be a parent to my daughter.
No longer under section, Alexis was free to go. She still required treatment for autism, however, the kind of treatment she could only get through the NHS.
It suddenly made sense. It was inevitable that I was going to melt down. Autistic people need structure, routine, calmness, predictability. Inpatient units are the opposite. They're loud, busy, chaotic, sensory charged. And they recommended that I continue to learn about, autism and go and get some support in what's called an assessment and treatment unit.
An assessment and treatment unit, also known as an ATU, is a high-security psychiatric facility set up to treat people like Alexis with autism or patients with learning disabilities. And with specialist care, Alexis could have a life with her daughter again.
Looking at the magazine, you saw pictures of a member of staff smiling with an autistic person. You saw, these wonderful green lawns with the houses that I might be living in. And he just said, you've got this new diagnosis, we can help you understand your diagnosis, we can help you understand what's gone on with you. And he has sort of assured me that I would get what I needed to get back to where I was before, back into the community. And, I believed him.
Following this conversation, Alexis agreed to be admitted to an assessment and treatment unit at Milton Park Therapeutic Campus in Wyberston, Bedfordshire. Little knowing that her darkest period and long days in solitary confinement were yet to come. Next time, Alexis plans an escape that, if successful, will take her thousands of miles from England.
I knew at that moment that I had to make a decision. Either I stay and I'm locked up somewhere far away from home, or I leave and I risk going there anyway. So I really didn't have a choice.
In relation to complaints made by Alexis in this episode, Kent and Medway NHS Trust said, "We continue to offer our sincerest apologies to Alexis for the unacceptable behaviour she experienced when she was in our care, which was fully investigated and acted upon at the time. We take the safety of our service users, their loved ones, and our staff extremely seriously, and do not tolerate any form of sexual harassment. Over the last 10 years, we have made improvements to the quality of the care we deliver, including eradicating mixed wards and significantly reducing our use of restrictive practices.